Good afternoon, everyone. It is an absolute honor to be standing here before you. I want to start by extending my deepest gratitude to Dr. Sachikonye for that incredibly warm introduction, and of course, to the entire organizing committee for creating this wonderful platform. It is truly a profound privilege to be back here. Looking around, I realize that 30 years is a significant milestone. It's a lifetime of learning, of teaching, and of clinical practice. Returning to the very place where it all began for me brings back a flood of memories and profound reflections on how much has changed, and yet how much the heart of medicine remains the same. As I look across this room today, I don't just see an audience of colleagues, I see the faces of dear friends who have walked beside me through the long shifts and the difficult cases. I see the teachers who didn't just give me knowledge, but who shaped my hands and my clinical mind. And most importantly, I see the brilliant learners who represent the future of our profession. We often say we stand on the shoulders of giants, but today, I am humbled to realize that so many of those giants are sitting right here in this room with us. This lecture is as much about your legacy as it is about my journey. My own journey has taken me across 3 continents, from the wards of Zimbabwe, where I first learned the art of healing, to the advanced clinics of Europe, and finally to the vibrant research and clinical environment here in Singapore. It has been a long and often winding path, full of unexpected challenges and incredible discoveries. But as I reflect on these 3 decades, I am reminded every single day that this journey was never a solitary one. It was a journey of shared discovery, of collective effort across borders, and of deep, lasting friendships that have sustained me every step of the way. But let me take you back to the very beginning, to a ward not far from where we are right now, exactly 30 years ago. If I close my eyes, I can still see the specific quality of the light in that ward. I can hear the hum of the old equipment, and I can still feel the weight of my white coat on my shoulders. I was a young doctor standing before my very first patient with acute kidney injury. It was a moment of pure, raw clinical reality that no textbook could have fully prepared me for. The stakes felt incredibly high, and the path forward was far from clear. I remember struggling through that first history and the physical examination. At the time, it felt like I was literally drowning in a sea of overwhelming data. There were numbers everywhere, complex urinary sediments, fluctuating potassium levels, rising creatinine clearances, and those daunting acid-base disturbances. Everything felt incredibly dense, unfamiliar, and, if I'm being honest, utterly overwhelming. I was searching desperately for patterns that I hadn't yet learned to recognize, and the cognitive load of that one case felt like it was testing the limits of everything I had learned in medical school. In those days, stab peritoneal dialysis was often the only form of life-sustaining dialysis we had readily available. Our resources were limited, our equipment was basic, and the needs of our patients were often immense and urgent. I remember looking at that simple dialysis setup and asking myself a question that would echo through my career. Why is nephrology so difficult? Why does it have to be so incredibly complex and demanding? That question was the catalyst for my deeper journey into the science of clinical reasoning and the art of decision-making under pressure. And in many ways, that question has stayed with me through every stage of my career. But as the years have passed, I have come to a deeper realization. I realized that this struggle wasn't just about the kidneys or the complexity of renal physiology. It was about how medicine, in its most challenging forms, shapes us as human beings. It's about how we learn to think clearly when complexity threatens to overwhelm us, and how we find our way through the dense fog of clinical data to see the human being who is waiting for our care beneath the numbers. It is about learning how to think clearly, how to decide wisely in the face of uncertainty, how to care deeply for our patients' souls as well as their bodies, and ultimately, how to sustain ourselves and find harmony in this demanding practice. Those are the 4 fundamental themes I want to explore with you today. We will look at the psychology that underlies our specialty, the profound ethics that guide our care, and the incredible technological innovations that are currently changing everything we thought we knew about nephrology. Fast forward 30 years to the present day, and yet nephrology remains one of the most feared and misunderstood specialties among medical learners worldwide. Studies from right here in Singapore and from the UK consistently show a remarkably low level of confidence among both undergraduates and postgraduates when it comes to understanding and applying renal principles. The term nephrophobia was actually coined more than a decade ago to describe this phenomenon. This systemic fear of the kidneys, or perhaps more accurately, a fear of the perceived mathematical and physiological complexity they represent. But we must ask ourselves, is learning really the primary problem in nephrology? My research and my experience suggest the answer is no. Our learners are actually building illness scripts quite effectively, and evidence shows that foundational basic science knowledge doesn't simply fade away after graduation. The real difficulty lies in retrieval, the ability to access that knowledge in cognitively demanding, high-stress clinical environments where the patterns aren't always clear and the pressure to act is immediate. The issue isn't what we know, it's whether we can find it when it matters most. Knowledge retrieval is fundamentally driven by perceived relevance. When a piece of knowledge connects clearly and directly to the clinical situation at hand, it becomes instantly accessible and usable. But when that clinical trigger is weak or the pattern is atypical, the knowledge remains buried and out of reach. In nephrology, where cases are often complex and patterns are frequently obscured by multi-organ failure or chronic illness, finding that relevance trigger becomes much more difficult. We are often working in a space of profound uncertainty where traditional patterns fail us. The late Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate, famously described two distinct systems of thinking. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and driven by pattern recognition. It's what we use for most of our daily clinical work. System 2, however, is slower, more effortful, and deeply analytical. As busy, often overworked clinicians, we naturally and necessarily rely heavily on System 1 thinking. But System 1 depends entirely on recognizing patterns that fit our existing illness scripts. When a patient's case is atypical and those patterns fail to fit, our intuitive retrieval fails, and we are forced into the demanding work of System 2 reasoning. Let's illustrate this with a real case. One Saturday afternoon about 10 years ago, I had to place an emergency left neck dialysis catheter. When the routine post-procedure chest X-ray came back, as you can see, something simply did not fit. My instinctive System 1 response, and likely the response of many in this room, was to assume a mistake. I thought it was a mediastinal misplacement or a technical error. It was the most common sense explanation. But when we paused to engage our System 2 reasoning and think anatomically and embryologically, a different and far more interesting possibility began to emerge. Suddenly, the dense embryology lessons taught by Professor Vaz 35 years prior became retrievable. The diagnosis became clear. It was a persistent left superior vena cava. In this moment, System 1 had failed because the pattern was rare, but System 2 rescued the clinical situation. This is classic nephrology reasoning, having the discipline to pause, to question our first instincts, and to recruit our foundational scientific knowledge to solve a complex clinical puzzle. It is about moving from the first easiest thought to the deeper evidence-based truth of the patient's unique anatomy. Clinical reasoning is never a linear process, although textbooks often portray it that way, as a simple sequence from history to treatment. In reality, especially in a specialty like ours, reasoning is iterative, dynamic, and constantly constructed. It integrates basic sciences, clinical context, individual values, and prior encounters. Take a simple case of hyperkalemia. It's never just a high number. It requires us to think about RAS blockade, dietary indiscretion, metabolic acidosis, distal sodium delivery, tissue breakdown, and even the nuances of how the blood sample was handled. It is a beautiful, complex web of information. This is precisely why nephrology must be taught through cases, not just lectures. Case-based learning creates what we call desirable difficulties. challenges that actually strengthen the pathways for retrieval and reasoning. It forces our learners to integrate basic science with clinical ambiguity and competing diagnoses head-on. Real patients don't present in the neat compartmentalized categories we find in textbooks. Through this productive struggle with real-world complexity, our learners build illness scripts that are far stronger and more durable for the long term. We are teaching them how to think, not just what to know. However, cases alone are not a silver bullet. We need faculty and teachers who are equipped and willing to champion active learning effectively. Our own research from 8 years ago revealed a sobering truth. Many of our educators remain uncomfortable with these new pedagogies. Traditional one-way content delivery often still dominates over guided clinical reasoning. When we fail to make this transition in our teaching, nephrology continues to feel like a theoretical and unnecessarily difficult subject to our students rather than the living, breathing, and fascinating puzzle that it actually is. Now let us move to our second major theme. We must remember that medicine is never only about curing disease. It is also about the profound act of caring. In the ancient Hippocratic tradition, we are called not only to treat, but to exercise care with deep empathy and compassion. Our patients are not merely collections of physiological data points and laboratory values to be optimized. They are human beings with fears, with complex relationships, with suffering, and with a search for meaning. And I truly believe that nowhere is this human element more apparent or more critical than in the field of nephrology. Consider the case of the 79-year-old lady with end-stage renal disease and advanced stage 4 cancer. She had no decisional capacity, and while her prognosis was very poor, her family insisted on continuing dialysis. Meanwhile, the clinical team felt this was no longer aligned with the goals of care. This is the moment where clinical reasoning meets ethics. It's no longer just a technical problem of fluid management. It becomes a deep, agonizing question of proportionality, of burdensome care, and of what it truly means to act in the best interests of a vulnerable patient. It requires wisdom, not just knowledge. Furthermore, we must recognize that outside of a Western worldview, these ethical decisions are often shaped by family, culture, and lived experience in different ways. In Confucian Asian societies, concepts like surrogate autonomy and filial piety exert a powerful influence on care decisions. Similarly, Ubuntu philosophies emphasize the importance of relational personhood and community support. Questions of suffering, dignity, and hope are always deeply contextual. Ethics can never exist in isolation from culture and the human experience. And as clinicians in a globalized world, we must learn to navigate these complexities with humility. Given these pressures, it is perhaps not surprising that moral distress is so common among our nephrology trainees. Moral distress is that heavy feeling of knowing what might be right, yet feeling unable to act due to systemic or familial constraints. Hierarchy, uncertainty, and family dynamics all contribute to this tension. Over time, this emotional dissonance accumulates, and it is a major factor in the high burnout rates we see in nephrology, a state characterized by emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. We must acknowledge this toll if we are to sustain our profession and our people. So the ultimate challenge is not just thinking, deciding, or caring, it is sustaining ourselves and enduring within this demanding field. This is perhaps one of nephrology's greatest and most personal lessons. Over the years, I have realized that the strategy is not to run away from the complexity or the difficult decisions, but to remain grounded and to practice essentialism. As David J. McNeff suggests, work-life balance may be a myth in our profession. Work-life harmony is a far more realistic and healthy goal. It's about intentionally aligning our work, our relationships, our well-being, and our intellectual and spiritual growth. But the story doesn't end with the challenges. After a long period of therapeutic stagnation, nephrology is now changing at a breathtaking pace. We are entering a new era of innovation and optimism. For our current learners, I truly believe there has never been a better time to enter this field. Transformation is happening on multiple fronts, from SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 agonists fundamentally changing cardio-renal metabolic care, to the expansion of precision medicine and home therapies. We are moving from simply slowing the progression of disease to actually changing disease trajectories and improving lives in ways we once only dreamed of. Artificial intelligence is also rapidly reshaping both the clinical practice of nephrology and medical education itself. We are seeing incredible potential in predictive analytics, advanced imaging, and intelligent decision support systems. In a specialty defined by enormous amounts of complex data, AI can fundamentally transform how our learners retrieve, apply, and personalize their knowledge. This leads us into the world of precision medical education, learning that is adaptive, data-driven, and tailored to the individual. This is how we will finally begin to bridge the retrieval gap and reduce the phenomenon of nephrophobia. Significant challenges certainly remain, from the growing burden of chronic kidney disease in our aging populations to the need for more integrated, less fragmented care models. We must continue to mentor and sustain our younger doctors through these realities. To conclude, we have journeyed through what nephrology teaches us about breaking barriers in how we think, how we decide and care, and how we sustain ourselves with purpose. It is about embracing innovation while never losing sight of the human heart of our work. It is about the whole person, always. As William Osler so famously reminded us, the good physician treats the disease, the great physician treats the patient who has the disease. That has always been and must always be what medicine is about. My own journey across 3 continents started right here 30 years ago, and it has been my great honor to share these reflections with you today. Thank you for your time, your dedication to our patients, and for the incredible journey we all share. Thank you.